40 years ago, I sold a baby for $2,000. That baby is now a billionaire and standing at my door. The worst part? He's my own grandson. I never thought I'd see him again. Life has a way of bringing back your worst mistakes right when you think you've buried them deep enough. My name is Martha Jenkins, and at 78 years old, I thought I'd take this secret to my grave. It all started in the winter of 1985. My daughter Ellie was just 17 when she got pregnant. Her boyfriend, a no-good boy from the wrong side of town, disappeared as soon as he found out. Ellie was devastated, but determined to keep the baby. I was a widow, working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. We were living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Chicago's South Side, and some days we couldn't even afford to turn the heat on. When Ellie went into labor, I took her to Cook County Hospital. She gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. I remember looking at his tiny face, his eyes already alert, taking in the world. Ellie named him James, after her father. For 3 weeks, we tried to make it work. Ellie was still in high school, and I would take care of little James during the day, then work the night shift at the factory. We were barely sleeping, barely eating. Then came that bitter cold January night. The heating in our apartment broke down. We wrapped James in all the blankets we had, but he still wouldn't stop crying. Ellie was crying too, from exhaustion and helplessness. I watched my daughter and grandson suffering, and something broke inside me. The next day, I saw an advertisement in the newspaper. A wealthy couple was looking to adopt a newborn. They were offering compensation for medical expenses. I called the number with shaking hands. I met the couple, the Richardsons, at a fancy restaurant downtown, a place I could never afford. They looked perfect, well-dressed, well-spoken, kind. They showed me pictures of their beautiful home with the nursery already set up. They talked about the private schools their child would attend, the vacations they would take, the opportunities they would provide. "They can give him everything you can't," Mrs. Richardson said gently. She wasn't being cruel. She was stating a fact we both knew was true. I didn't tell Ellie about the meeting. Instead, I told her about a special program at a hospital in the suburbs that could help babies with colic. I said they'd keep him for a few days to run tests and give him special treatment. My daughter was so exhausted she didn't ask many questions. The hardest moment of my life was handing that tiny bundle to Mrs. Richardson in the hospital parking lot. Mr. Richardson handed me an envelope with $2,000 cash for your daughter's future, he said. I told myself this was an act of love, not betrayal. James would have opportunities we could never give him. I told Ellie that James had a rare condition and needed to stay at the hospital longer. A week later, I came home crying, telling her there'd been complications. Her baby didn't make it. The hospital had already taken care of everything. There was no body to bury. The look in my daughter's eyes that day has haunted me for 40 years. She never fully recovered. She finished high school, but never went to college like she'd planned. She never had another child. She moved away to California 10 years ago, saying she couldn't bear the memories in Chicago anymore. The money helped us move to a better apartment with reliable heating. I put some aside for Ellie's education, though she never used it, but no amount of improved circumstances could wash away my guilt. And now, 4 decades later, a sleek black car pulled up outside my modest home. A tall man in an expensive suit stepped out. When he knocked on my door and I opened it, I knew immediately who he was. He had Ellie's eyes. "Are you Martha Jenkins?" he asked, his voice confident, yet with an edge of uncertainty. I nodded, unable to speak, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give out right there. He said, "My name is James Richardson. I believe you might be my grandmother." As I stared into the face of the grandson I had sold away all those years ago, one terrible question kept repeating in my mind. How much did he know? And what was he here to do? Forgive me or destroy what was left of my life? I invited James in, my hands trembling as I poured him tea in my best cup, the one with only a small chip on the handle. He looked so out of place in my humble living room, like a movie star who had wandered onto the wrong set. His watch probably cost more than everything I owned. "How did you find me?"
I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. James set down his cup carefully. DNA testing, he said. I always knew I was adopted. My parents, the Richardsons, never hid that from me. They were good people. The way he emphasized good people made my stomach twist. Did he know what I had done? They passed away 5 years ago, car accident. After that, I became curious about my biological family. I submitted my DNA to one of those ancestry websites. He paused, studying my face. A few months ago, I got a match, a second cousin. Through her, I found out about you and my mother. I couldn't meet his eyes. Ellie. Her name is Ellie. Yes, Ellie. He rolled the name around as if testing how it felt. Where is she? California. We don't talk much these days. The weight of my lie had created a distance between us that I didn't know how to bridge. James nodded, his face giving nothing away. The DNA test showed she's my biological mother, but there were no hospital records of her giving birth, no adoption papers, nothing official. His eyes narrowed slightly. Do you know why that might be? My teacup clattered against the saucer. He knew, or at least he suspected. It was a different time, I whispered. We were so poor. Mrs. Jenkins, he interrupted, his voice suddenly all business. I'm not here to judge you or cause trouble. I built a tech company that I recently sold for $3.7 billion. Money isn't an issue for me. I blinked, trying to comprehend the number. The $2,000 I had received for him had seemed like a fortune at the time. He continued, I just want to understand what happened, and I want to meet my biological mother. I shook my head. Ellie thinks you died as a baby. It would destroy her to learn the truth now. James leaned forward, his expression softening slightly. Don't you think she deserves to know her son is alive? That all these years of grief were unnecessary? The grief wasn't unnecessary, I said, surprising myself with my firmness. I took her child away. That loss was real. James stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my small, neglected garden. He said without turning around, I've hired private investigators. They found Ellie. They've been watching her for weeks. My blood ran cold. What? Why would you do that? I needed to know what kind of person she is before I approached her. Now he turned to face me. She works at a library, lives alone, volunteers at an animal shelter on weekends. Seems like a decent person who's had a hard life. I felt tears welling up. She is. She's a good person. Better than me. James walked back to his seat but remained standing. Here's what's going to happen, Mrs. Jenkins. I'm going to California to meet Ellie. You can either come with me and help explain the situation, or I'll do it myself, but she will know the truth. Please, I begged. She'll hate me forever. Maybe, he agreed, his voice neither kind nor cruel. But that's not my problem. I've lived 40 years not knowing my true history. I won't live another day that way. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. My car will be here at 8 a.m. tomorrow. If you're coming, be ready. If not, I'll handle it alone. After he left, I sank to the floor, sobbing. How had it come to this? In my mind, I had saved that baby by giving him a better life. I had saved my daughter from a lifetime of struggle as a single teenage mother. I had done what I thought was best for everyone. But I built that decision on a foundation of lies. And now those lies were about to crashing down around me. Could I face Ellie and admit what I had done all those years ago? Could I bear to see the moment when her grief transformed into betrayal and hatred? Or should I let James go alone? Let him be the bearer of both wonderful and terrible news. Perhaps it would be easier for Ellie to forgive him, a stranger, than to forgive her own mother. As night fell, I sat in my darkened living room staring at old photographs of Ellie as a young mother, holding baby James for those brief weeks we had him. In one photo, she was smiling down at him with such love. She never looked that happy again after I told her he had died. What would tomorrow bring? Would I find the courage to face the consequences of what I had done all those years ago? Or would I hide, like I had been hiding from the truth for 40 years? The choice was mine, but time was running out. In just a few hours, a car would arrive and I would either step into it and face my past, or watch it drive away with it any chance of redemption. As my grandfather used to say, the truth will set you free, but first it'll make you miserable. I was already miserable. Could the truth possibly set any of us free after all this time?
At 7:30 the next morning, I was sitting on my front porch with a small suitcase. I hadn't slept. Instead, I'd spent the night calling in favors, arranging for my neighbor to water my plants, and trying to figure out what to say to Ellie when I saw her. Nothing seemed adequate. James's black car pulled up precisely at 8 a.m. The driver, a young man in a suit, took my suitcase while James watched from the back seat, his face betraying surprise that I had actually decided to come. "You made the right choice," he said, as I settled into the plush leather seat beside him. "There is no right choice in this situation," I replied. "Only different kinds of wrong." We rode to the airport in silence. I'd never flown first class before. Under different circumstances, I might have enjoyed the experience, the spacious seats, the attentive service, the champagne James insisted I try. But all I could think about was Ellie and the look that would come over her face when she learned the truth. "Tell me about her," James said, as our plane crossed over Nevada. "What is she like?" I sighed, looking out at the clouds below. Ellie was always sensitive. Even as a little girl, she felt things deeply. When her father died, she was only 10, but she tried to be strong for me. She grew up too fast. I paused, memories flooding back. "When she got pregnant with you, she was so determined. Everyone told her to give you up for adoption, officially, properly, but she refused. She wanted to raise you herself." "Then why did you—" He trailed off. "Why did I sell you?" I finished for him. The harsh words hung in the air between us. "Because I was weak. Because I was poor. Because I thought I was doing what was best." I turned to look at him directly. I've regretted it every day since. James said nothing, but I could see him processing my words, weighing them against his own feelings. "What about my biological father?" he asked eventually. "Ray Miller," I said, the name bitter on my tongue even after all these years. He was 19, worked at a garage, charming when he wanted to be. He left town as soon as Ellie told him she was pregnant. Last I heard, he was in prison somewhere in Michigan. James nodded, as if confirming information he already knew. Of course, he had mentioned private investigators. He probably knew more about Ray Miller than I did. "And the Richardsons," I asked hesitantly, were they good parents?" A softness came over James's face. "The best. They gave me everything, not just material things, but love, guidance, support. They were honest about me being adopted. They said my birth mother was very young and wanted me to have opportunities she couldn't provide." He looked pointedly at me. "They never mentioned a transaction." I felt myself flush with shame. "They protected you from that. They were good people." "Yes, they were." We landed in San Francisco in the early afternoon. Another sleek car was waiting for us. As we drove through the city and across the Golden Gate Bridge, James briefed me on what his investigators had learned about Ellie's life. She lived in a small apartment in Santa Rosa, about an hour north of San Francisco. She had never married. She had worked at the same public library for 15 years. She kept to herself mostly, but was well liked by her colleagues. She visited the cemetery where she thought James was buried every year on his birthday. That last detail made me press my hand to my mouth, fighting back tears. "Does she know we're coming?" I asked. James shook his head. "I thought it would be better in person. I've arranged for us to go to her library first. It's a public place. If things get emotional, it might be better than showing up at her home." I had to admit it was a considerate plan. But as we drove through the beautiful wine country of Sonoma County, I felt like I was heading to my own execution.
The Santa Rosa Public Library was a modern building downtown. We arrived just after 3 p.m. James spoke briefly with a security guard who pointed us toward the reference desk. And there she was, my Ellie. Her hair was gray now, pulled back in a neat bun. She wore glasses on a chain and a cardigan despite the California warmth. She was helping an elderly man find a book, her manner patient and kind. James stopped a few feet away, watching her intently. I could see the emotions playing across his face. Curiosity, nervousness, perhaps even a hint of recognition, though that was surely impossible. "Is that her?" he whispered. I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. As the elderly patron thanked Ellie and moved away, James squared his shoulders and approached the desk. I hung back, my legs suddenly feeling too weak to support me. "Excuse me," he said, as I heard him say. "Are you Eleanor Jenkins?" Ellie looked up with her professional librarian smile. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" James took a deep breath. "My name is James Richardson. I was born on February 12th, 1985, at Cook County Hospital in Chicago." I watched as confusion crossed Ellie's face, followed by shock as the significance of the date and place registered. Her hand went to her throat. "That's not possible," she whispered. "My son died." "No," James said gently. "He didn't." And then Ellie's eyes moved past James and found me, standing frozen in the background. The look of betrayal that came over her face was everything I had feared and worse. In that moment, I knew that no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same between us again. I had protected my lie for 40 years, but now the truth had come to collect its due.
"Mom?" Ellie's voice cracked as she stared at me, her face draining of color. "What is this? What's happening?" The few library patrons nearby looked up, sensing the tension. James glanced around, then spoke quietly to Ellie. "Is there somewhere more private we could talk?" Ellie's eyes hadn't left my face. "The conference room," she said mechanically, pointing to a door behind her desk. Then she called to another librarian. "Susan, I need to take my break now." The conference room was small, but mercifully empty. James held the door for us, then closed it firmly behind us. Ellie stood with her back against the wall, looking as though she might collapse at any moment. "I don't understand," she said, her voice small. "Mom, what is he talking about? Why is he saying these things?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How do you begin to confess a betrayal of this magnitude? James stepped in. "Miss Jenkins, I know this is shocking, but DNA tests confirm that I'm your biological son. I was not adopted through official channels. There was a private arrangement." Ellie's eyes widened as she looked from James to me and back again. "A private arrangement?" she repeated. Then understanding dawned on her face. No, Mom, tell me you didn't." "I'm so sorry, Ellie," I finally managed to say, my voice breaking. "We were so poor. You were so young. I thought—" "You told me he died?" Ellie raised, lying joyful prayer in a sea of disfeeling ore. "You let me grieve for 40 years. You watched me visit an empty grave." "There was no grave. I told you the hospital took care of everything." "Because there was no body. Because he wasn't dead." Ellie was shouting now, tears streaming down her face. "He was living with some rich family while I cried myself to sleep every night." James looked uncomfortable, but stood his ground. "Miss Jenkins? Ellie, I understand you're upset, but I need you to know that the family who raised me, the Richardsons, they were good people. They gave me a good life." "That wasn't your decision to make." Ellie turned on me, her finger pointing accusingly. "He was my son, mine, not yours to sell." The word sell hung in the air like a slap. I flinched, but didn't deny it. How could I?
How much? Ellie demanded, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. How much was my baby worth to you? I closed my eyes, unable to look at her. $2,000. Ellie made a sound like she'd been physically struck. $2,000, she repeated incredulously. That's what my lifetime of grief cost? That's what his life was worth to you? The money helped us move to a better place. I put some aside for your college. I don't care about the money, Ellie screamed, slamming her hand on the conference table. I would have lived in a cardboard box if it meant keeping my son. James stepped between us. Please, he said calmly, this isn't helping anyone. What's done is done. We can't change the past, but we can decide what happens now. Ellie looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. I saw her taking in his features, the shape of his eyes so like her own, the set of his jaw that reminded me of Ray. You look like your father, she said softly. James seemed surprised. I do? Ellie nodded, tears still streaming down her face. Around the eyes? And your height? She hesitated, then asked, Do you have children? No, I've never married. My work has been my life. What do you do? Ellie asked, seeming eager to learn anything about the son she had lost. I founded a tech company. We developed security software. It was recently acquired for a significant amount. He's being modest, I interjected. He sold his company for billions. Ellie's eyes widened again, but this time with a different emotion. Pride, perhaps, mixed with a deep sadness for all she had missed. I would like to get to know you, James said carefully. If you're willing, I understand if you need time. Ellie hugged herself tightly, as if trying to physically hold herself together. I don't know what I need, she admitted. This morning, I was a childless woman who had lost her baby 40 years ago. Now I have a grown son standing in front of me, and a mother I can't trust. Her words cut through me like a knife. But what had I expected? Forgiveness? Understanding? I deserved neither. Perhaps we should continue this conversation elsewhere, James suggested gently. I've reserved a private dining room at a restaurant nearby. Or, if you prefer, we could go to your home. Ellie shook her head. Not my home. Not yet. I glanced. I need to take the break now. As she prepared to leave, Ellie stopped by her desk to gather her things and speak to her colleague. I watched her maintain her composure, though I could see how badly her hands were shaking. James moved to stand beside me. This is harder than I expected, he admitted quietly. It's going to get worse before it gets better, if it ever gets better. As we walked to the car, Ellie maintained her distance from me, choosing instead to walk beside James. I couldn't blame her. In her shoes, I wouldn't want to be near me either. What would happen over dinner? Would Ellie ever be able to forgive me? Would she and James form a relationship after all these years? And what would become of me, the woman who had destroyed one family in the name of creating a better life, only to find that the past never truly stays buried? The truth was out now, and there was no telling where it would lead us all.
The restaurant James had chosen was the kind of place I'd only seen in magazines. Elegant, understated, with prices that weren't even listed on the menu. The private dining room had a view of vineyards stretching into the distance. Under different circumstances, it would have been breathtaking. A waiter poured water and wine, then discreetly withdrew. The three of us sat in awkward silence, each waiting for someone else to speak first. Finally, Ellie set down her untouched wine glass with deliberate care. I want to know everything, she said, looking directly at James. Your childhood, your education, your life. I've missed 40 years. Please. James nodded, seemingly relieved to have a clear direction. I grew up in Lake Forest, outside Chicago. The Richardsons had no other children. They couldn't have any. They were older when they adopted me, in their 40s. He smiled slightly. My father was an investment banker. My mother was on several charity boards, but her main focus was me. As James continued to talk about his childhood, the private schools, the summer camps, the family trips to Europe, I watched Ellie's face. There was pain there, certainly, as she heard about all the experiences she had missed, but there was also something else, a gradual easing of tension, perhaps relief that her son had been loved, had been cared for. I was an intense kid, always taking things apart to see how they worked. My parents encouraged that curiosity. They gave me my first computer when I was 8, and by 12, I was writing basic programs. "Were you happy?" Ellie interrupted, the question seeming to burst out of her. James paused, considering. "Yes," he said finally. "I was loved and secure. I had opportunities. But," he hesitated, "there was always something missing, a question about where I came from, who I really was. The Richardsons told me I was adopted when I was very young, but they had very little information about my birth parents." He looked at me then, his expression unreadable. "Or so I thought." I dropped my eyes to my plate. The Richardsons had kept their word. They had never told James about the money, about the parking lot exchange. They had protected him from that ugly truth. "When did you start looking for us?" Ellie asked. "Seriously? After my parents died. I was 35. Suddenly they were gone, and I realized I knew nothing about my medical history, my genetic background, and I was curious. I wanted to know where I came from." "Did you ever imagine—" Ellie trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "That I was sold?" James finished for her. His voice was calm, but I could hear the undercurrent of emotion. "No, I assumed it was a standard adoption, just not well documented. The truth was unexpected." Ellie turned to me then, her eyes cold. "How could you do it, Mom? How could you just give away my baby without even asking me?" "I told myself it was for the best," I said, my voice barely audible. "We were so poor, Ellie. You were so young. I saw a chance for him to have a better life and for you to have a future." "That wasn't your decision to make." Ellie slammed her hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "You had no right." "I know that now," I admitted. "I knew it then too, if I'm honest. But I was desperate." "Desperate enough to lie to me for 40 years? To watch me grieve a child who wasn't even dead?" "I couldn't take it back," I whispered. "Once it was done, what good would telling you have done? You would have hated me and he would have still been gone." "So you let me believe my baby died to protect yourself," Ellie said bitterly. "Not to spare me pain, but to spare yourself the consequences of what you'd done." I couldn't deny it. She was right. James cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I didn't come here to cause more pain," he said. "I came because I wanted to know my history, and because I thought you deserved to know the truth." Ellie turned back to him, her expression softening. "I'm glad you came. Whatever else happens, I'm grateful to know you're alive, that you've had a good life." She hesitated, then asked, Would you be willing to stay in touch, to get to know each other?" "I'd like that very much," James said, and I could hear the sincerity in his voice. They continued talking, sharing details of their lives, finding connections and differences. I sat quietly, feeling increasingly like an intruder. This reunion wasn't for me. I was the villain in their story, not a participant in their reconciliation. Eventually, I excused myself to use the restroom. When I returned, I overheard them talking. "Never understood why she was so overprotective," Ellie was saying. After I thought you died, she barely let me out of my sight. She was terrified something would happen to me too." "She was afraid of losing you," James replied. "Afraid you'd find out what she'd done." "Probably both," Ellie conceded. She looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. Her expression closed off immediately. I took my seat, feeling the weight of their combined gaze. I should probably get a hotel room, I said quietly. Give you two some space to get to know each other. That would be best, Ellie agreed coldly. James looked between us, then sighed. I've actually reserved rooms for both of you at a hotel nearby. I hoped, we might spend a few days together. If that's what you want. Ellie nodded slowly. I'd like that. I've accumulated quite a bit of vacation time. I've also taken the liberty of having some photographs reproduced from my childhood and beyond. I thought you might want to see them. As he spread the photos on the table, Ellie leaned forward eagerly. I caught glimpses of a smiling boy on a bicycle, a teenager at graduation, a young man in front of a university building. All the moments I had stolen from her. And in that moment, looking at the life that had unfolded without us, I wondered if I would ever be able to make amends for what I had done. Or if some betrayals are simply too great to ever be forgiven. The answer, I feared, was staring right in my face in the form of my daughter's cold, unforgiving eyes. The hotel James had chosen was the finest in Santa Rosa, with spacious rooms and attentive staff. My room was next to Ellie's, with James's across the hall. As we said goodnight in the corridor, I reached out to touch Ellie's arm, but she flinched away. Ellie, please, I began, but she cut me off. Not tonight, Mom. I just can't. I nodded, accepting her rejection as my due. Good night, then. In my room, I sat by the window, looking out at the twinkling lights of the city below. I thought about calling my neighbor to check on my plants, but it seemed so trivial now. Instead, I stared at my reflection in the darkened glass. When had I become so old? When had the weight of my secrets etched themselves so deeply into my face? The next morning, we met for breakfast in the hotel restaurant. Ellie was already there when I arrived, sitting with James, their heads bent over something on the table. They looked up as I approached, and I was struck by their resemblance, not just physical, but in the way they held themselves, alert and watchful. Good morning, I said tentatively. Ellie merely nodded, but James pulled out a chair for me. We were just looking at some documents I brought, he explained. Birth records, adoption papers, or the lack thereof. On the table were official-looking papers, including a birth certificate with Ellie listed as the mother and father unknown in the other space. There was also a death certificate, dated 3 weeks later. My stomach clenched at the sight of it. You actually filed a death certificate, Ellie said flatly, for a child who wasn't dead? The Richardsons' lawyer handled everything, I said weakly. I just signed where they told me to. Falsifying a death certificate is a crime, James pointed out, his tone neutral but his eyes hard. So is selling a child. Fear gripped me. Are you going to report me to the police? James sighed. No, the statute of limitations has long passed. And what would be the point? More pain? More suffering? He gathered the papers together. I just wanted you both to see the paper trail, to understand how thoroughly this deception was constructed. Ellie was staring at the birth certificate, her finger tracing the name James Edward Jenkins. You kept the name I gave you, she said softly. The Richardsons changed it to James Edward Richardson, James confirmed. They told me they wanted to honor my birth mother's choice of first name. A small kindness, I thought. Perhaps the Richardsons had felt some guilt about their part in the deception, despite their wealth and privilege. What happens now? I asked, looking between them. James straightened the edges of the papers. That's up to the two of you. I found what I was looking for, my origins, my history. I'd like to build a relationship with Ellie if she's willing. As for you, Mrs. Jenkins, he paused. That's Ellie's decision. Both of them looked at Ellie, who was still staring at the birth certificate. I don't know, she said finally. I need time to process all this.
Of course, James said. I understand. The rest of breakfast passed an awkward conversation. James told us more about his company, about the security software he had developed that had revolutionized the industry. Ellie spoke a little about her work at the library, her life in Santa Rosa. I said little, feeling increasingly like an unwelcome observer to their tentative reconnection. After breakfast, James suggested a drive through the nearby wine country. It's beautiful this time of year, and it might be good to get out, get some fresh air. Ellie agreed, but I begged off, claiming a headache. In truth, I couldn't bear another minute of seeing the bond forming between them while I sat on the sidelines, the architect of everyone's pain. After they left, I returned to my room and tried to read, but couldn't focus. Instead, I found myself drawn to the hotel's garden, a peaceful space with benches and flowering plants. I sat there for a long time, watching butterflies flit among the blossoms, thinking about the ripple effects of our choices, how one decision, made in desperation 40 years ago, had altered the course of so many lives. I was still there when Ellie found me hours later. She sat beside me on the bench, keeping a careful distance. James took me to a winery, she said after a long silence. We had lunch overlooking the vineyards. He told me about his plans to start a foundation for disadvantaged children. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He asked about you, Ellie continued, about what kind of mother you were to me. I looked at her then, searching her face. What did you tell him? Ellie sighed, her eyes on the garden path. I told him the truth, that you worked yourself to the bone to provide for me after Dad died, that you never complained even when things were at their worst, that you were always there for me, always supportive. She paused. Until you weren't. The last words hung in the air between us, sharp as knives. I understand why you hate me, I said quietly. I deserve it.
I don't hate you, Mom, Ellie replied, surprising me. I wish I could. It will be easier. She turned to look at me directly. I'm angry. I'm hurt. I feel betrayed in the most fundamental way possible. But you're still my mother. We still have 40 years of history together, good and bad. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I haven't forgiven you, Ellie said sharply. I don't know if I ever will. But I'm trying to understand. James made me see something today. What's that? I asked. That holding on to this anger hurts me more than it hurts you. She plucked a leaf from a nearby plant, turning it over in her fingers. I've spent 40 years grieving a child who wasn't dead. Now I find out he's alive, successful, a good person. Should I waste more years being angry about what I can't change? Hope flickered within me, small but persistent. What are you saying? I'm saying I need time. I'm saying I want to get to know my son without the shadow of the past hanging over us. Ellie stood up. James wants to take us both to dinner tonight. I told him I'd come find you and ask if you felt up to it. Of course, I said quickly. Whatever you want. Ellie nodded, her expression still guarded. He's trying to build bridges, Mom. He's a better person than either of us deserve. As she walked away, I realized she was right. James could have come into our lives seeking vengeance, exposure, even financial compensation. Instead, he was trying to create something positive from the ashes of our deception. The question was, could Ellie and I follow his example? Or would the weight of the past continue to crush whatever relationship we might salvage? That evening at dinner, I noticed a subtle shift. Ellie asked me questions, including me in the conversation in a way she hadn't before. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall she had built between us. As we lingered over dessert, James suddenly looked serious. There's something else I need to tell you both, he said. Something I discovered during my search. Ellie tensed beside me. What is it? James took a deep breath. "It's about Ray Miller, your father," he added, looking at Ellie. I felt a chill run through me at the mention of that name. What about him? "He's not in prison in Michigan, as you thought," James said, looking at me. "He was released 5 years ago, and he's living right here in California." The world seemed to tilt around me. Ray Miller, free and in California? The man who had abandoned Ellie when she needed him most, who had never even seen his son. "Why are you telling us this?" Ellie asked, her voice strained. James hesitated. "Because he's part of this story too, and because my investigators found something else." He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, then turned it so we could see. "He's been looking for you, Ellie, for years." On the screen was a series of social media posts and online forum messages, all from Ray Miller, all searching for information about Eleanor Jenkins from Chicago, about a baby born in 1985. "He's been trying to make amends," James said quietly. "He got sober in prison, turned his life around. He's been searching for you both to apologize." Ellie's face had gone pale. "I don't want to see him," she said firmly. "He left me when I was pregnant. He doesn't get to come back now and play the repentant father." James nodded. "I understand. I just thought you should know. He's your father, Ellie. My grandfather." The words hung in the air, another reminder of the tangled web of relationships that had been severed and now might be rewoven. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "Your investigators, did they make contact?" "No," James assured us. "They observed from a distance. No one has approached or revealed your whereabouts. That decision is entirely yours." Ellie pushed her dessert away, her appetite gone. "I need to think about this. It's too much, too fast." James reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first physical contact I'd seen between them, and it made my heart ache with a mixture of joy and regret. "Take all the time you need," he said gently. "I'm not going anywhere." As we left the restaurant, Ellie surprised me by linking her arm through mine. I looked at her questioningly, but she kept her eyes forward. "Don't read too much into it. I just need something to hold on to right now." Back at the hotel, we said goodnight in the hallway again. This time, when I reached for Ellie, she allowed a brief hug before pulling away. Progress, as small as it was. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on me. Ray Miller was back in the picture now, another complication, another piece of the past resurfacing. Would he be the final revelation, or were there more secrets waiting to be uncovered? And how much more could any of us take before the fragile new connections we were forming shattered completely?
The next morning, Ellie knocked on my door early. When I opened it, she was already dressed, her face set with determination. "I want to see him," she announced without preamble. It took me a moment to catch up. "Ray? You want to see Ray?" She nodded, stepping into my room and closing the door behind her. "I've been thinking about it all night. I need to confront him, to hear what he has to say for himself." "Are you sure that's wise?" I asked cautiously. "After everything else that's happened." "That's exactly why," Ellie interrupted. "All these secrets, all these lies, I'm tired of them. I want everything out in the open, no more hiding from the past." There was something in her tone that worried me, a brittle quality, as if she might shatter at any moment. "Have you told James?" "He's arranging it. He's calling his investigators to set up a meeting for today." My heart sank. It seemed too fast, too soon, but I could see from Ellie's expression that her mind was made up. "Do you want me to come with you?" Ellie hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, you were there at the beginning. You should be there for this too." An hour later, we were in James's car, driving south toward San Francisco. James had explained that Ray Miller was working as a mechanic at a garage in Oakland, just across the bay. His investigators had confirmed that Ray would be working today.
Are you absolutely certain about this? James asked Ellie as we crossed the Golden Gate Bridge. We could wait, take more time to prepare. I'm sure, Ellie said firmly. I've been waiting 40 years without even knowing it. I'm done waiting. I sat quietly in the back seat, watching the city skyline approach. What would Ray look like after all these years? The last time I'd seen him, he was a cocky 19-year-old with a motorcycle and a bad attitude. Now he'd be in his 60s, like Ellie. The garage was in an industrial area of Oakland, a large cinder block building with several bays and cars in various states of repair outside. James parked across the street, and we sat for a moment, gathering ourselves. According to my information, he's the senior mechanic. He's been working here for 3 years since moving to California. He lives alone in an apartment nearby. No criminal record since his release, regular attendance at AA meetings. You've been thorough, I observed. James glanced at me in the rearview mirror. I needed to be sure he wasn't a threat. Ellie took a deep breath. Let's go. We crossed the street and entered the garage's small office. A woman behind the counter looked up from her computer. Can I help you? We're looking for Ray Miller, James said smoothly. The woman nodded. He's in Bay 3. You can go through that door, but watch your step. The garage was loud with the sound of machinery and the radio playing classic rock. We walked past 2 mechanics working on cars until we reached Bay 3, where a man's legs were visible beneath an old Ford. Ray Miller? James called over the noise. He slid out from under the car, wiping his hands on a rag. He was older, of course, his dark hair now gray and thinning, his face lined. But I recognized him immediately, the same shark blue eyes, the same set to his jaw that I'd noticed in James. Ray looked confused as he took in the 3 of us, strangers in his workplace. Yeah, that's me. Do I know you folks? Ellie stepped forward, her whole body tense. You might not recognize me. It's been a long time. Ray squinted at her. Then his eyes widened in shock. Ellie? Eleanor Jenkins? Ellie nodded, her expression giving nothing away. Ray stood slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. Then his gaze shifted to me. Martha? Is that you? Hello, Ray, I said stiffly. His eyes moved to James, confusion evident. I'm sorry, I don't... This is James, Ellie said, her voice tight with emotion. Your son. Ray staggered slightly, reaching back to steady himself against the car. My son? He stared at James in disbelief, then back at Ellie. But they told me, when I called from prison, they said the baby died. That's what I was told too, Ellie said coldly. It wasn't true. Ray looked utterly lost. I don't understand. Perhaps we could speak somewhere more privately, James suggested, glancing around at the other mechanics who were beginning to take notice of the tense conversation. Ray nodded, still looking dazed. Yeah, sure, let me... He called to another mechanic, explaining he needed to take his break early. Then he led us outside and around the corner to a small park with benches. As we sat down, Ray kept shaking his head in disbelief. I can't believe it's really you, Ellie. I've been looking for you for years. So I've heard, she replied coldly. Bit late, don't you think? Ray flinched at her tone, but didn't argue. You're right. It's way too late, but when I got sober in prison, making amends was part of the process. You and the baby, our baby, were at the top of my list. He looked at James with wonder. I can't believe you're my son. You look like... Like you, James finished. Around the eyes, so I've been told. Ray seemed overwhelmed. How did this happen? How did we all end up here? And so we told him the whole story. My deception, the Richardsons, James's search, our reunion.
Ray listened in stunned silence, occasionally shaking his head or wiping at his eyes. When we finished, he looked directly at me. "You sold our baby? Without telling either of us?" I met his accusing gaze steadily. "You weren't exactly around to consult, Ray. You ran as soon as she told you she was pregnant." "I was a coward," Ray admitted, turning to Ellie. "I was 19, scared, stupid. By the time I realized what a terrible mistake I had made, you were gone. Your mother had moved you both away. No one would tell me where. We moved to a better apartment. With the money." Ray looked sick. "So my running away gave you the opportunity to sell our child? Don't you dare try to shift the blame," I snapped. "If you had stayed, if you had helped Ellie, none of this would have happened." "Stop it, both of you," Ellie said sharply. "This isn't helping." We fell silent, properly chastised. James watched the exchange with a thoughtful expression, taking everything in. "Why did you come looking for us now?" Ellie asked Ray. "After all these years?" Ray sighed heavily. "Like I said, making amends. I got sober 15 years in prison. I started looking for you both as soon as I got out. I wanted to apologize, to try to make up for what I'd done, if that was even possible." He looked at James. "I was told the baby, you, had died. I wanted to at least visit the grave, pay my respects." "There is no grave," James said quietly. "I was alive, just elsewhere." Ray nodded, clearly processing. "And now you're successful, I gather. You look well off?" James smiled slightly. "I've done all right for myself." "He's being modest," Ellie said with a hint of pride in her voice. "He's a billionaire." Ray's eyes widened comically. "A billionaire? My son is a billionaire?" He laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "Life sure takes some strange turns, doesn't it?" And somehow that broke the tension. All of us smiled, even Ellie, acknowledging the bizarre circumstances that had brought us together after all these years. "What happens now?" Ray asked, looking between us. It was the same question I had asked yesterday, and the answer was still uncertain. But as I watched Ellie's face, I saw something new there. A determination, yes, but also a glimmer of peace, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. "Now," she said, "we start telling the truth, to ourselves and to each other. It's long overdue." We spent the rest of the day with Ray, learning about his life since he had left Chicago all those years ago. The story was not a happy one. Years of drifting, alcoholism, petty crimes that eventually led to a 10-year prison sentence for armed robbery. But then came the turning point. Getting sober, finding religion, earning his GED, and then a certification in automotive repair while incarcerated. "I'm not proud of the man I was," Ray said as we sat in a small cafe near his workplace. "But I'm trying to be someone my son could respect now." He glanced at James, still seeming amazed that the successful, well-dressed man across from him was his biological child. James nodded thoughtfully. "We all have our journeys. The Richardsons taught me that it's not where you start, but where you end up that matters." I watched the three of them talking, Ellie still reserved but thawing, Ray eager and repentant, James measured and diplomatic. They were a family of sorts, connected by blood, if not by shared history. And where did I fit in? I was the architect of their separation, the keeper of secrets. Would there be a place for me in whatever new configuration emerged from these revelations? That evening, we returned to Santa Rosa. Ray had promised to visit on the weekend after his shift ended on Saturday. James had extended his stay, pushing back meetings and delegating responsibilities to his executive team. Ellie had called the library and arranged for additional time off. It seemed we were all committed to seeing this through, whatever this turned out to be.
Back at the hotel, James invited us to his suite for a nightcap. As the three of us sat with our drinks, whiskey for James and Ray, wine for Ellie and me, James cleared his throat. I've been thinking about why I really started this search. I told myself it was about medical history, genetic background, but that wasn't the whole truth. Ellie leaned forward slightly. What was the truth? James swirled his whiskey, watching the amber liquid catch the light. When my adoptive parents died, I realized I was alone in the world. I had colleagues, business associates, a few friends, but no family, no real connections. He looked up at us. I wanted to find where I belonged, who I belonged with. And have you? I asked softly. James considered the question. I think I'm starting to. It's not what I expected. It's complicated and messy and painful in ways I didn't anticipate. But it's real, and that counts for something. Ellie reached over and squeezed his hand. It counts for a lot. Later, as Ellie and I walked back to our rooms, she paused outside her door. I keep thinking about what James said, about belonging. He's wise for his age, wiser than I was at twice his age. Ellie nodded. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. I steeled myself. Anything. If you could go back, knowing what you know now, would you do it again? Would you still sell him? The question hit me like a physical blow. I took a moment to truly consider, to look beyond the easy answer to the complicated truth. No, I said finally. I wouldn't. Not because he didn't have a good life, he clearly did, but because it wasn't my choice to make. It was yours. And because no amount of comfort or security was worth the pain I caused you. Ellie studied my face, searching for any sign of insincerity. Then she nodded once. Thank you for being honest. Does that help? Knowing that I regret what I did? A little. It doesn't change the past, but it helps to know you understand why it was wrong. It was a small step toward healing, but a significant one. As I went to bed that night, I felt a tentative hope that perhaps in time, Ellie might find a way to forgive me. Not forget, never forget, but maybe forgive. The next morning, James suggested we visit Ellie's home. I'd like to see where you live, if you're comfortable with that. Ellie hesitated, then agreed. It's nothing fancy, just a small apartment. I'd still like to see it, James insisted. Ellie's apartment was in an older building near the downtown area of Santa Rosa. It was modest but neat, filled with books as one might expect from a librarian. Family photos covered one wall, many of Ellie and I together over the years in happier times. I noticed James studying them intently. No husband? No children? He asked, looking around. Ellie shook her head. I never married. After I thought you died, I couldn't bring myself to try again, to risk that kind of loss. The revelation hung heavy in the air. Another consequence of my actions, not just the loss of her son, but the family she might have had. I'm sorry, James said softly.
It's not your fault, Ellie replied. Then, looking pointedly at me, it was never your fault. I accepted the rebuke silently. It was nothing less than I deserved. As Ellie made coffee, James wandered to a bookshelf and pulled out a photo album. May I? He asked. Ellie nodded, and he began to flip through the pages. I moved to look over his shoulder and felt my heart constrict. It was an album dedicated to James, or rather, to the baby Ellie thought she had lost. There were the few photos we had of him during those 3 weeks, ultrasound images, a hospital bracelet, pressed flowers from what would have been his funeral. You kept all this, James said, his voice thick with emotion. Of course I did. He was my son. You were my son." James continued turning pages, then stopped suddenly. "What's this?" he asked, pointing to a small newspaper clipping. Ellie came to look. "Oh, that. A few years after I thought you died, I saw this article about the Richardsons in the Chicago Tribune. They were at some charity event. It mentioned their adopted son, James." She touched the grainy photo, which showed the Richardsons with a young boy between them. "I cut it out because the timing was right. He would have been about the same age my James would have been. I used to look at it and imagine that somewhere my son was living a life like this boy." James stared at the photo, then at Ellie in amazement. "This is me! This is actually me!" Ellie's hand flew to her mouth. "What?" "This charity event? It was for Children's Memorial Hospital. I remember it. I was 7 or 8. James looked stunned. "You had a picture of me all these years and didn't even know it?" I moved closer to see the photo. Sure enough, there was a young James, dressed in a little suit, standing proudly between Mr. and Mrs. Richardson. The coincidence was so remarkable it took my breath away. "It was you," Ellie whispered, tears filling her eyes. "All this time I was looking at my own son and didn't know it. Maybe some part of you did. Maybe that's why you kept the clipping." The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Ellie wiped her eyes and went to answer it. To our surprise, Ray stood there, a day earlier than expected. "I'm sorry to just show up, but I couldn't wait until the weekend. I called in sick to work. I hope that's okay." Ellie hesitated only briefly before stepping back to let him in. "We were just looking at some old photos," she explained, leading him to where James and I still stood with the album. Ray approached cautiously, as if afraid of intruding. When James showed him the newspaper clipping and explained the coincidence, Ray shook his head in wonder. That's incredible." The four of us sat in Ellie's small living room, drinking coffee and navigating the strange new reality we found ourselves in. The conversation was sometimes awkward, sometimes emotional, but underneath it all was a sense of pieces finally coming together, jagged and mismatched as they might be. As I watched them talk, I realized something important was happening here. A family was forming. Not the conventional kind, not the one any of us had envisioned, but a family nonetheless. And despite everything, despite my terrible mistake 40 years ago, I was being allowed to witness it, to be part of it in some small way. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning, and after 40 years of secrets and lies, a beginning was more than I had any right to expect.
Over the next few days, our unusual family gathering continued. James extended his stay again, renting a house nearby where we could all meet more comfortably. Ray found temporary accommodation in Santa Rosa, calling his boss to explain he needed more time. Ellie showed James around her beloved library and the animal shelter where she volunteered. I watched from the sidelines, included but always slightly apart. On our 5th day together, James invited us all to the rented house for dinner. When we arrived, we found the table set elegantly, with catered food keeping warm in the kitchen and expensive wine breathing on the counter. "I have a proposition for all of you," James announced once we were seated with our meals. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about the future, our future, together." We all looked at him expectantly, waiting. "I'm in the process of establishing a charitable foundation," James continued, "part of the proceeds from the sale of my company. It will focus on supporting young single mothers and their children, providing housing, education, health care, child care, all the things that might have helped you keep me, Ellie, if they had been available." Ellie's eyes widened. "That's wonderful, James. I'd like you to be part of it, all of you. Ellie, with your experience at the library, you'd be perfect to oversee the educational programs. Ray will need outreach to people who've made mistakes, who need second chances. And Martha," he turned to me,
Your perspective on what desperation can drive people to do would be invaluable." I was stunned. "You want me involved? After what I did?" James set down his fork. "What you did was wrong. We all know that. But you did it because you thought you were helping, because there weren't better options. This foundation is about creating better options so that no one ever feels they have to make the choice you did." I felt tears spring to my eyes. It was more grace than I deserved. "Would we have to move?" Ellie asked, practically. "The foundation will be headquartered in San Francisco, but I'm not asking any of you to uproot your lives immediately. We can start slowly, see how it works. I want to make something positive come out of our story." Ray cleared his throat. "I don't know what I could contribute. I'm just a mechanic with a criminal record." "You're also a man who hit rock bottom and found his way back," James pointed out. "That kind of experience is priceless when you're trying to help others do the same." We discussed the details over dessert. James had clearly given this a lot of thought. The foundation would be called Second Chances, a name that resonated with all of us for different reasons. There would be positions for each of us if we wanted them, with salaries that made my eyes widen and Ellie gasp. "You don't have to decide right away," James assured us. "Take some time to think about it." As we helped clear the dishes, Ellie pulled me aside in the kitchen. "What do you think?" she asked quietly. "I think it's a generous offer. But more importantly, what do you think? It's your life he's asking you to change." Ellie looked thoughtful. "I've been at the library for 15 years. I love it, but this could be a chance to make a real difference, to help young women who are in the position I was in." "You'd be wonderful at it," I said sincerely. Ellie hesitated, then asked, "Would you come too, if I decided to do it?" The question caught me off guard. "You'd want me to?" "We still have a lot to work through," Ellie said carefully. "I'm still angry. I still have moments when I can barely look at you. But you're my mother. And despite everything, I don't want to lose you too." It was the closest thing to forgiveness she had offered, and I clung to it like a lifeline. "Then yes, I'd come, if you wanted me to." Later that evening, as we sat in the living room with after-dinner drinks, Ray raised his glass. "To James," he said, "for finding us, for bringing us together, and for being a better man than his father ever was." "To James," we all echoed. James looked embarrassed but pleased. "To family, however unconventional." As we clinked glasses, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. The path that had led us here was twisted and dark, paved with lies and loss, but the destination, this moment, these people, held a glimmer of hope I hadn't dared to imagine. The next morning, James asked if he could speak with me privately. We walked in the garden behind the rented house, the California sunshine warm on our shoulders. "I've been wanting to ask you something," James said after we had walked in silence for a few minutes, "something I haven't felt comfortable asking in front of the others." I braced myself. "Go ahead." "Do you regret giving me to the Richardsons? Not the way you did it, not the lies. I know you regret those, but the actual outcome. Do you wish I had stayed with Ellie, grown up in poverty without the opportunities I had?" It was a complex question, one I had been wrestling with since he appeared on my doorstep. "I regret the pain I caused," I said slowly. "I regret taking the choice away from Ellie. I regret the lies and the years of grief." I looked at him directly. "But when I see the man you've become, the good you're doing in the world, the good you plan to do, no, I can't regret that outcome." James nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. "The Richardsons told me once that sometimes the right destination can come from a wrong turn. I think they might have been talking about me, about how I came to them." "They sound like wise people," I said. "They were," James agreed. "They would have liked to meet you all, I think. They weren't perfect. They were complicit in the deception after all. But they were good people who wanted a child to love. And they did love you. It wasn't a question." "Very much," James confirmed, "just as Ellie would have given the chance." We continued walking, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, but his question stayed with me. Did I regret the outcome? The honest answer was no. James had thrived with the Richardsons in ways he might never have with us. But that didn't justify the means, the terrible choice I had made for my daughter, the years of grief I had caused.
Perhaps that was the most difficult lesson in all of this, that sometimes a wrong decision could lead to a right result and yet still remain wrong. There was no simple moral to this story, no neat resolution that erased the past. There was only the messy, complicated present and the uncertain future we were all trying to build together. That evening, Ellie announced that she had decided to accept James's offer to join the foundation. Ray followed suit, somewhat hesitantly. All eyes turned to me. "I'd like to help too," I said. "If you'll have me." James smiled. "Of course, the foundation will need all of us, with our different experiences and perspectives." "Then it's settled," Ellie said. "We're all in." As we raised our glasses again, I couldn't help but marvel at this strange journey that had brought us to this point. 40 years ago, I had made a terrible decision that tore our family apart. Now, against all odds, we were finding our way back to each other. Not unchanged, not unscathed, but together nonetheless. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was too much pain for that. But it was real, and it was ours. And after a lifetime of secrets, the truth, however difficult, felt like freedom.
6 months later, I stood in the gleaming lobby of the Second Chances Foundation in downtown San Francisco. Large windows overlooked the bay, flooding the space with natural light. The foundation's logo, a stylized open door, adorned the wall behind the reception desk. So much had changed in those 6 months. Ellie had resigned from her position at the library and moved to a beautiful apartment in the city, paid for by James. Ray had relocated too, taking a position as the foundation's outreach coordinator for former inmates. And I had sold my little house in Chicago, said goodbye to my plants and neighbors, and started a new chapter at the age of 78. The foundation was already making waves in the nonprofit world, thanks to James's connections and generous funding. We had established partnerships with hospitals, universities, and community organizations. Our first residential facility for young single mothers was under construction, with plans for 5 more across the country. I worked 3 days a week, sharing my story with staff and clients alike, not as an example to follow, but as a cautionary tale about what desperation could lead to when proper support wasn't available. It wasn't easy, reliving my mistake over and over, seeing the judgment in people's eyes, but it was necessary work. And in some small way, it felt like atonement. Ellie and I were still rebuilding our relationship, one careful conversation at a time. Some days were better than others. There were still moments when the pain would resurface, when a casual reference to the past would open old wounds. But we were trying, both of us committed to finding a way forward. James divided his time between the foundation and his other business interests, but he made a point of having dinner with all of us at least once a week. Ray had become an unexpected source of support for me, perhaps because we both carried the weight of past mistakes, both sought redemption in our own ways. On this particular day, we were preparing for an important event, the official launch of the foundation, with press, potential donors, and community partners in attendance. James had asked all of us to speak briefly about our personal connection to the foundation's mission. As I helped arrange flowers in the conference room where the event would be held, Ellie approached me. "Are you nervous about your speech?" she asked. "Terrified," I admitted. "I've never been comfortable with public speaking and telling our story to strangers." Ellie nodded. "I know. I'm nervous too." She hesitated, then added, "I read your draft. It was very honest." "Too honest?" I asked anxiously. "No," Ellie said, after a moment's consideration. "People need to hear the truth, however uncomfortable. That's the whole point of what we're doing here." She helped me finish with the flowers, then checked her watch. "I should go change before the guests arrive. James wants us all looking our best for the photographers." As she turned to leave, I called after her, "Ellie?" She paused, looking back. "I'm proud of you. Of the woman you've become despite everything. Despite me." Ellie's expression softened. "Thank you, Mom."
It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was acknowledgement, recognition of the complicated love that still bound us together, despite the pain. The event began at 6. The conference room filled with elegantly dressed people, all curious about the new foundation and its unusual origin story. James, looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit, welcomed everyone and explained the foundation's mission and programs. Then it was time for the personal stories. Ray went first, speaking candidly about his mistakes, his regrets, and his commitment to helping others avoid the same pitfalls. He spoke of meeting his son after 40 years, of second chances and redemption. Ellie followed, her voice steady as she described the pain of losing a child, the years of grief, and the miraculous reunion. She didn't shy away from her anger, her sense of betrayal, but she also spoke of healing, of the possibility of building something positive from the ashes of the past. Then it was my turn. As I approached the podium, I felt my heart racing. The room was full of strangers, all watching me expectantly. I took a deep breath and began. 40 years ago, I sold my grandson for $2,000, my voice shaking slightly. A murmur ran through the audience. I did it because we were poor, because my teenage daughter was struggling, because I thought I was giving him a better life. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. I was wrong. Not about the better life. As you can see, James has done remarkably well. But I was wrong to make that decision, to take that choice away from my daughter, to build a wall of lies that lasted for decades. I went on to describe the desperate circumstances we had faced, not as an excuse, but as context. I spoke about the lack of support systems, the limited options for young single mothers in the 1980s. I talked about the grief that had shadowed Ellie's life, the relationship strained by my deception. The foundation we're launching today exists to ensure that no grandmother, no mother ever feels they have to make the choice I made. We want to provide the support, the resources, the community that we lacked. We want to offer genuine options, genuine help, not quick fixes built on deception. I looked at Ellie, at Ray, and finally at James. Our family was torn apart by poverty, by desperation, by poor choices. But we've been given a second chance to come together, to heal, and to help others avoid the same pain. That's what Second Chances is all about. Thank you. The applause was warm and genuine. As I returned to my seat, James squeezed my hand briefly. Ellie gave me a small nod, her eyes glistening with tears.
James took the podium again for the final speech. He spoke eloquently about his journey to find his biological family, his shock at discovering the circumstances of his adoption, and his determination to create something positive from the experience. I had 2 sets of parents, he said. The Richardsons, who raised me with love and privilege, and Ellie and Ray, who created me but were denied the chance to know me. And I had a grandmother, he looked at me, who made a terrible mistake for what she thought were the right reasons. He paused, scanning the audience. Our story is unusual. Not many families are separated and reunited the way ours was, but the underlying issues, poverty, lack of support, desperate choices, those affect countless families every day. That's why this foundation matters. That's why we're all here. The event concluded with a standing ovation. As guests mingled afterward, many approached us individually, sharing their own stories of adoption, of difficult choices, of family separations and reunions. I was struck by how many people had been touched by similar issues, though perhaps not in such dramatic circumstances. Later that night, the 4 of us gathered in James's penthouse apartment overlooking the city. We were all exhausted but exhilarated by the successful launch. As we sat with drinks on his balcony, watching the lights of San Francisco twinkle below, James raised his glass. To second chances, he said, and to family, in all its complicated, messy,
imperfect glory. We clinked glasses. The night air was cool on my skin, the city beautiful below us. I thought about the journey that had brought us here, the terrible decision I had made all those years ago, the lies I'd told, the pain I'd caused. And now, improbably, we were here, together, working to ensure that others wouldn't face the same impossible choices. "I have 2 somethings for each of you," James said suddenly, setting down his glass and disappearing inside. He returned with 3 small boxes, handing one to each of us. Inside mine was a delicate silver key pendant on a chain. Ellie and Ray had received identical ones. "The key to second chances," James explained, and a reminder that we all hold the keys to each other's healing. Ellie was the first to put hers on, the silver gleaming against her skin. Ray followed, looking touched beyond words. I held mine for a long moment before slipping it around my neck. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Not just for this, but for finding us, for bringing us together, for forgiving us," Ray added quietly. James shook his head. "I didn't come looking for you with forgiveness in mind. I came looking for answers, for connection. The forgiveness, that's come along the way, for all of us." Ellie, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "I'm still working on the forgiveness part," she admitted. "Some days it's easier than others." I nodded, accepting her honesty. "That's fair. But I'm glad we're here," she continued. "I'm glad we're trying, and I'm proud of what we're building together." As the conversation continued, I found myself watching them. My daughter, her son, his father, my family, reconstructed from the wreckage of the past. It wasn't perfect. The cracks were still visible, the repairs obvious. But it was holding together, growing stronger day by day. 40 years ago, I had made a decision that I thought would give everyone a better life. I had been partly right. James had thrived with the Richardsons, had become a remarkable man. But I had been wrong about so much else. Wrong about the cost of lies, wrong about my right to make that choice, wrong about the lasting damage of secrets. Now, in my late 70s, I was being given a chance to make amends, to be part of building something that might prevent others from making similar mistakes. It wasn't redemption. I didn't believe in neat, tidy redemption arcs that erase the past, but it was a way forward, a purpose that acknowledged the past while working toward a better future. As I looked out at the city lights and felt the weight of the key pendant against my skin, I thought about the young woman I had been, desperate and frightened, making a terrible choice in what I thought was love. I thought about the decades of deception that had followed, the grief that had shadowed all our lives. And now, in this moment, this unlikely reunion, this fragile new beginning, I had sold a baby for $2,000. That would always be part of my story, a stain that could never be completely washed away. But it wasn't the end of the story. Not anymore. Now there were new chapters being written, chapters about healing, about forgiveness, about second chances. And for the first time in 40 years, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps in these new chapters, I might find some measure of peace at last.